G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here, and I have an excuse to make a mad scientist movie. On the one hand, it may be about solid electricity. And I'm sure you all recognise solid electricity as a hillbilly term for aluminium, or as the Americans call it, aluminum, because the Americans sort of can't spell. So their educationalists over there decided to sort of dumb down and simplificate the language for them, so therefore they drop letters out. They call it aluminum. The rest of the English-speaking world calls it aluminium. Why is it called solid electricity? Well, it's because you get a ceramic-lined steel retort, you fill it nearly to the top with black sand called bauxite, you stick in a couple of electrodes and you fire into there as much direct current electricities as you can organise. Let's just say you get a medium-sized coal-fired power station, and that's a good amount of electricity. What'll happen is you'll melt the sand and all the silicates will form a sort of a frothy, glassy, foamy slag on top of the molten metal. And the molten metal, it can then be poured into ingots. And the ingots, strangely enough, are apparently an anthropomorphic trapezoidal copy of a basalt crystal. But this stuff has vastly different properties to any basalt crystal that you're ever going to see. Part 1, line 1, after you've put the electricity into the process the first time, then you can heat it up in an ordinary blacksmith's forge, and you can pour it into a sand mould and you can make all sorts of useful stuff out of it. Or you can roll it into sheets and then you can cut the sheets out and fit them together to make all sorts of other stuff. These are two-stroke oil condensers. The aluminium does oxidise, but the oxide sticks to the aluminium and then prevents further contact with the atmosphere. So effectively, if you're prepared to tolerate one molecule of aluminium oxide on the outside of your metallic aluminium alloy, then it's pretty much corrosion proof unless you put some other metal in contact with it in the presence of water and salt. If you go and stick some copper and some aluminium together in some salty air, yep, the copper will burn holes in the aluminium. But if you don't do anything silly with it, it's almost corrosion proof. You can even make electric solar thermal ramjets out of aluminium. If you've got a solar panel handy and a four-wheel drive that's burning too much fuel, give it a streamlined solar panel. Something that's pretty much corrosion proof and aerodynamically neutral, if not slightly beneficial. So, like I said, even with a homemade blacksmith's forge, like this one that my father cobbled together with some concrete and a time-expired automotive wheel and some star pickets, if you take a rig like this and hook it up to a vacuum cleaner running backwards, you can pretty easily get yourself a fire hot enough to smelt your ingots out of time-expired automotive pistons. They're made of aluminium. Mag alloy motorcar wheels might have a bit too much magnesium in them. I don't know what they go like in the forge. I suppose the magnesium will probably just burn away and leave you with the aluminium. If you can find them, awful lot of aeroplane propellers are made with hollow aluminium blades. Commercial light aircraft I'm talking about. These are two blades off two different propellers put together on the world's second most worst wind turbine rotor. I didn't make it, I collected it. And another good ready source of aluminium, solid electricity, believe it or not, is time-expired power lines. Once they've been up there for 20 or 40 years, the wind blowing them backwards and forwards fatigues them. And if you can get a hold of any time expired power lines, you can melt them in a forge and just pour them straight onto the earthen floor of the blacksmith's forge. And it's not quite as elegant as pouring the aluminium into an ingot mould, but it's probably more convenient than keeping it in its wiry form. Okay, so why all the emphasis on aluminium and solid electricity? Well, you see, it's because I went to the dump on Thursday, and look what I found at the dump. It's what I think they would call in Britain an aqua lung. It's aluminium, because steel would go rusty, and it's got numbers stamped into it up here, which indicate that it's an aluminium cylinder that weighs 15.15 kilograms, and it will hold 11.2 kilograms worth of water. And I've weighed it, and it weighs 34.5 pounds, which is 15.6 kilograms. So I'm suspecting that this fitting here weighs in at about a pound. And I've done the calculations. It's got 0.4 of a cubic foot of internal space, and if you pump that up to 100 pounds per square inch, which is about the kind of pressure that your average workshop air compressor can reach, and most people run their cars on less than 40 psi, but the compressor will go up to 100 psi in there at 16 breaths to the minute is 2 minutes worth of air time. Now, I'm fairly certain that the people who buggerise around with this sort of stuff, they have 30 minutes to the tank with a 10-minute reserve. Now, 40 minutes would indicate that they must pump these things up to 2000 psi, which is why it's a 33-pound aluminium cylinder. It's a lot of solid electricity. Now, at the dump, the valve appeared to be open, and I opened the valve and closed the valve, and nothing much came out of it. It just seemed to me that it would be good to do a test to find out whether the valve is actually working, and if it is in fact safe to approach, or if the valve has been containing 2,000 pounds per square inch for 20 years. Because apparently that's when this thing was last inspected, 5th month 1993. So it hasn't been inspected for 20 years, and if it's been holding 2,000 pounds per square inch, that's pretty scary. So what I've done is I opened the valve and let the cylinder cool down overnight while I had it standing out here in the middle of the clearing so it could radiate any of its stored heat into space. And it was showing 10.5 degrees this morning. Now, at the moment, the air temperature out here is about 35 Celsius. And I've got the cylinder lying in front of a shiny black plastic sheet of perspex to kind of act as a bit of a convection shield to stop air from, roaring around it, and also to act as a little bit of a reflection shield to try and get a bit more sunlight onto this side of it, because the sun is up there on the other side of that cloud. So the theory is that by having the reflective black perspex there, we get a little bit more heat onto the cylinder, which is at the moment, according to the thermo probe, containing a fair amount of solar thermal energy. So the air in there's somewhere around 40 degrees, above 40 degrees. That's if the valve is working. Well, regardless of the valve being working. But if the valve is working, the air that got trapped in there this morning was only at 11 degrees, so it's now 4 times its previous temperature. So, in theory, it should be at least 4 times the pressure that it was this morning. Although probably Mr. Boyle could give you a better calculation. Maybe it's only twice the pressure, but if this valve is functional, when I rotate it, we should be rewarded with a hissing noise. There we go. Yahoo yippee. It is a functional pressure vessel. And that means I haven't got to chop the bloody thing up with an axe before I melt it down, because I can use it as a pressure vessel. It's 20 times as good a pressure vessel as the ones that you get when you buy an air compressor in the shop. And if I can find somebody who can inspect it, because I'll have to get it inspected to get it filled, and then I can find somebody else who can fill it for me, this should provide about 40 minutes worth of compressed air for any kind of a bushfire shelter or bunker that anybody should be perhaps considering constructing. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Solid electricity, or a functional pressure vessel. Ciao.